Right now, in your kitchen, sitting in a cheap plastic shaker is something that once started wars, something that men were paid in, something that toppled a French king, freed a nation from the British Empire, and built cities out of nothing but dust and desert. It's not gold, it's not oil, it's salt. And for most of human history, this stuff sitting next to your stove was worth more than the food it seasons. Before refrigerators, before ice, before any way to keep meat or fish from rotting within days, there was only one thing standing between a community and starvation through the winter: salt. So people went to extraordinary lengths to get it. They dug wells hundreds of feet into the earth in ancient China searching for brine. They built entire settlements around salt springs in Europe. The city of Salzburg, Austria, literally has the word salt in its name because it was built entirely on salt mining wealth. Salt wasn't just useful, it was the foundation entire cities were founded on. And once something becomes that essential, it stops being a resource. It becomes power. Salt wasn't just useful, it was the foundation entire cities were founded on. And once something becomes that essential, it stops being a resource. It becomes power. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid partly in salt, or given an allowance specifically to buy it. That allowance was called a salarium. Say that word slowly: salarium. That's where we get the word salary. Every single time you get paid for your job, you're using a word that traces back to men being compensated in white crystals, because it was that valuable. In some places, salt functioned as literal money. Blocks of salt were used to buy goods and pay debts across parts of Africa for centuries. Caravans of thousands of camels crossed the Sahara Desert carrying nothing but slabs of salt, trading it pound for pound with gold in cities like Timbuktu. Pound for pound with gold, but wherever there's something worth as much as gold, there's also going to be blood. Because salt was so essential, governments realized something dark. You could tax it and people would still have to pay, no matter how high the price climbed. This wasn't a luxury tax. It was a tax on survival itself. France had something called the gabelle, a brutal salt tax that forced ordinary citizens to buy a fixed amount of heavily taxed salt every year. The wealthy were often exempt. The poor were crushed under it. By the late 1700s, resentment over taxes like the gabelle had become one of the sparks that helped ignite the French Revolution. Centuries later, the British Empire did something eerily similar in colonial India. They imposed a salt tax and made it illegal for Indians to produce or sell their own salt, even though salt sat naturally along their own coastlines. In 1930, Mahatma Gandhi responded by walking 240 miles to the sea with a growing crowd of followers behind him and picking up a handful of natural salt from the beach in open defiance of British law. It was called the Salt March, and it became one of the most powerful acts of civil disobedience in history. There's a darker chapter still. Along those same trans-Saharan trade routes, human beings were traded too. Salt mines in parts of Africa were worked by enslaved laborers, and salt itself was sometimes used as currency to purchase enslaved people. This wasn't just a seasoning. It was leverage. It was empire building. It was, in some of its darkest moments, the price of human lives. So, what happened? Why isn't salt worth its weight in gold today? The Industrial Revolution happened. New mining techniques let companies extract rock salt from massive underground deposits far faster than ever before. Railroads could move it cheaply across entire continents. And then, the real death blow: refrigeration arrived. Once people could keep food cold instead of salted, the ancient desperate need for salt as a preservation method basically vanished within a couple of generations. The thing that had toppled kings and funded empires became, almost overnight, one of the cheapest substances on Earth. Today, you can buy a year's supply of salt for less than the price of a single cup of coffee. And here's where the story turns almost poetic. For thousands of years, human civilizations fought wars, enslaved people, funded revolutions, and built entire cities around getting enough salt. Today, doctors spend their careers trying to convince us to eat less of it. So next time you reach for that plastic shaker on your table, remember, you're holding a piece of history that built empires, started revolutions, and was once worth its weight in gold. And it costs about $2. If a grain of salt can carry this much hidden history, imagine what's hiding behind the sugar bowl, or the ice in your freezer, or the mirror on your wall. Subscribe because we're about to find out.